Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm here with another session of Reddit stories in Minecraft because honestly, there's something so perfect about building in a peaceful world while diving into the absolute chaos that strangers post online about their lives. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into some stories that'll either restore your faith in humanity or completely destroy it. I'm honestly not sure which way these are going to go, but that's half the fun, right? Before we jump in, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's been subscribing and commenting on these videos. We're building something really special here, and I love seeing all your reactions to these wild stories. If you're new here, this is where we combine the therapeutic clicking of Minecraft blocks with some of the most unhinged relationship drama and life disasters that Reddit has to offer. Today's collection is particularly intense. We've got everything from family betrayals to workplace nightmares to situations that make you question if some people are even living in the same reality as the rest of us. And honestly, that's exactly what we need sometimes. There's something oddly comforting about hearing about other people's problems while peacefully mining diamonds or building a cozy cottage. So let's start building this little house here while we dive into our first story. This one comes from someone who thought they had their living situation figured out. But sometimes, the people closest to you can surprise you in the worst possible ways. The story is titled, "My Roommate Has Been Stealing My Food and Replacing It with Expired Versions for Months." So this happened over the course of about 4 months, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around how elaborate and weird this whole situation was. I live with my roommate Jake in a 2-bedroom apartment downtown. We've been living together for about a year now, and for the most part, things have been pretty normal. We split groceries sometimes, but mostly we buy our own food and just try to be respectful about shared spaces. About 6 months ago, I started noticing that my food was going bad way faster than it should have been. Like I'd buy a carton of milk on Sunday, and by Wednesday, it would be sour, even though the expiration date said it should be good for another week. At first I thought maybe my fridge was having temperature issues, or maybe I was just getting unlucky with bad products from the store. But then it started happening with everything. Bread that should have been fresh for days would be mouldy after 2 days. Yogurt that was supposed to be good for 2 weeks would be chunky and gross after a few days. Even things like cereal and crackers that should last for months were going stale incredibly fast. I mentioned it to Jake and he said he'd noticed the same thing with some of his food. He suggested maybe we should get the fridge checked or contact our landlord about potential issues with the kitchen. I thought that made sense, so I put in a maintenance request. When the maintenance guy came out, he said the fridge was working perfectly and all the temperatures were exactly where they should be. He couldn't find anything wrong with any of the appliances. That's when I started paying closer attention to my food situation. I began keeping mental notes of when I bought things and when they went bad. I even started taking pictures of expiration dates when I brought groceries home. That's when I noticed something really weird. The expiration dates on my food were changing. I know that sounds crazy, but I'm serious. I'd taken a picture of a yogurt container that showed it was good until March 15th. But when I went to eat it a few days later, the expiration date on the container said February 28th. I thought maybe I had misread it or taken a picture of the wrong container, but it kept happening. A loaf of bread that I had photographed with a March 10th date suddenly had a February 25th date when I went to make a sandwich. A jar of peanut butter that should have been good until next year suddenly had an expiration date from 6 months ago. I started to think I was losing my mind. Like, expiration dates don't just change on their own, but I had photographic evidence that something weird was happening. I decided to do a little experiment. I bought a container of orange juice and immediately took multiple pictures of the expiration date, which was March 20th. I also wrote the date down on a piece of paper and put it in my room. Then I put the orange juice in the fridge and waited. 3 days later, I went to pour a glass of orange juice and it was already starting to taste off. I checked the expiration date and it now said February 18th. The container looked identical in every other way, but the expiration date had somehow changed by over a month. That's when I realised someone was replacing my food with older, expired versions of the same products. But who would do something so weird and elaborate? And how were they getting expired food that looked exactly like the fresh food I was buying? I decided to set up a small camera in the kitchen to see if I could catch whoever was doing this. I hid it behind some decorations on top of the fridge where it had a good view of the whole kitchen area. What I captured was absolutely insane. Jake was coming into the kitchen in the middle of the night, taking my food out of the fridge and replacing it with identical items from a large cooler he kept in his bedroom. He was literally running a food replacement operation. But here's the part that still blows my mind. He wasn't just randomly swapping my food with expired stuff. He was going to multiple grocery stores and buying the exact same products I bought, but specifically looking for ones that were close to expiration or already expired. He was spending his own money to buy worse versions of my food just to mess with me. I watched 3 nights of footage and saw him do this repeatedly. He had a whole system. He'd wait until I was asleep, then bring out his cooler of expired food and carefully swap everything. He even had a notebook where he was keeping track of what he'd replaced and when. I confronted him the next morning with the video evidence. At first he tried to deny it, but when I showed him the footage of himself literally holding his notebook and swapping out my milk at 2 a.m, he broke down and admitted everything. His explanation was somehow even weirder than the behaviour itself. He said he was conducting a social experiment to see how long it would take me to figure out that something was wrong. He claimed he was studying human perception and wanted to see if people would notice gradual changes in their environment. When I asked him why he chose to mess with my food specifically, he said it was because food spoilage was something people would blame on external factors instead of suspecting intentional sabotage. He thought it was the perfect crime because who would ever suspect their roommate was systematically replacing their groceries with expired versions? I asked him how much money he'd spent on this weird experiment, and he estimated it was probably around $300 over the 4 months he'd been doing it. $300 of his own money to buy expired food just to gaslight me about my groceries. The worst part is that he seemed genuinely proud of how elaborate and well-planned his scheme was. He showed me his notebook, where he'd been documenting my reactions and noting when I seemed confused or frustrated about the food going bad. He'd been treating my genuine confusion and concern like data points in his twisted experiment. I told him he needed to find a new place to live immediately. This wasn't just a prank or a social experiment. It was systematic, psychological manipulation that had been going on for months. He'd been making me question my own memory and perception while wasting hundreds of dollars of food that I'd paid for. Jake tried to argue that no real harm was done and that it was all in the name of scientific curiosity. He said I should be impressed by the dedication and planning that went into his experiment. He actually asked if I wanted to read his notes about my behavioural patterns during the 4 months of food sabotage. I'm honestly still processing how someone could think this was acceptable behaviour. The amount of time, money and effort he put into systematically messing with my food is genuinely disturbing. And the fact that he was documenting my reactions like I was a lab rat makes it even worse. I moved out 2 weeks later because I couldn't trust someone who would spend 4 months conducting psychological experiments on their roommate. The whole situation made me realise that some people are capable of incredibly elaborate deception for reasons that make absolutely no sense to normal people. Jake kept texting me after I moved out, saying he wanted to publish his findings and asking if I'd be willing to participate in follow-up interviews about the experience. I blocked his number. That story just makes my skin crawl because the level of planning and dedication required to pull something like that off is genuinely disturbing. Like, this wasn't a simple prank that got out of hand. This was months of systematic manipulation that required him to spend his own money and time just to mess with his roommate's head. The fact that he was taking notes and treating it like legitimate research makes it so much worse. This person was literally conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on someone he lived with, and then had the audacity to be proud of it when he got caught. Moving on to our next story, and this one takes workplace drama to a whole new level. Sometimes the people you work with can surprise you in ways that make you question everything about human nature. This story is titled "My Co-worker has been sabotaging my projects for promotion opportunities and I finally caught her." I work at a marketing firm with about 40 employees, and I've been there for almost 3 years now. For the most part, it's a pretty collaborative environment where people genuinely try to help each other succeed. Or at least, that's what I thought until I discovered that one of my co-workers has been systematically sabotaging my work for over a year. Her name is Michelle, and she sits in the cubicle right next to mine. We started around the same time and have always been friendly with each other. We'd grab coffee together, complain about difficult clients, and I even invited her to my birthday party last year. I genuinely thought we were friends. About 18 months ago, I started noticing that my projects were having weird technical issues. Files would go missing from shared drives, presentations would have formatting problems that I swear weren't there when I saved them, and sometimes important emails would disappear from my inbox entirely. At first I assumed it was just normal computer problems. Technology glitches happen all the time in office environments, and I didn't think much of it. But the problems started becoming more frequent and always seemed to happen right before important deadlines or client presentations. I'd spend hours recreating work that had mysteriously disappeared, or scrambling to fix formatting issues that would pop up at the worst possible times. It was incredibly stressful and started affecting my performance reviews because I was constantly missing deadlines or delivering work that looked unprofessional due to technical problems I couldn't explain. Meanwhile, Michelle's projects always seemed to go smoothly. She was consistently hitting her deadlines, her presentations looked polished, and she started getting assigned to bigger clients. I was happy for her success, but I couldn't understand why I was suddenly struggling with so many technical issues when I'd never had problems before. The situation got worse when we were both assigned to compete for the same promotion. Our boss told us that whoever could land a specific high-value client would get moved up to the senior marketing position we both wanted. This was a huge opportunity that could completely change my career trajectory. I worked for weeks developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for this potential client. I researched their industry, analysed their competitors, and created what I thought was the perfect pitch presentation. I was really confident that this was my chance to prove myself and finally get the recognition I deserved. The night before the big presentation, I stayed late at the office putting the finishing touches on everything. I saved all my files, backed everything up to the shared drive, and even emailed myself copies of the most important documents. I felt totally prepared. When I got to work the next morning, disaster struck. My presentation file was completely corrupted and wouldn't open. The backup on the shared drive was gone entirely. Even the copies I'd emailed to myself had somehow been deleted from my inbox. It was like all traces of my work had been systematically erased. I had to call the client and ask to reschedule the presentation, which was incredibly embarrassing and unprofessional. They agreed to meet the following week, but I could tell they weren't impressed by the last-minute change. Michelle offered to help me recreate my presentation, which I thought was really sweet of her. She stayed late with me for 2 nights, helping me rebuild everything from scratch. I was so grateful to have such a supportive colleague during what felt like the worst week of my professional life. Her presentation with the client went perfectly, and she landed the account. She got the promotion, and I was left wondering how everything had gone so wrong for me. I started questioning my own competence and wondering if I was just not cut out for this level of responsibility. But something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. The timing of all these technical problems seemed too convenient, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on. I decided to do some investigating. I reached out to our IT department and asked them to look into the missing files and deleted emails. What they found was shocking. Someone had been accessing my computer remotely and deliberately deleting my work. The log files showed that these intrusions had been happening for over a year, always late at night or early in the morning when I wasn't in the office. But here's the really crazy part. The person accessing my computer was using Michelle's login credentials. She had somehow gotten access to my workstation and had been systematically sabotaging my projects for months. When IT confronted her with the evidence, she initially tried to claim that her account had been hacked. But the pattern of activity was too specific and targeted for that explanation to make sense. She was only deleting my work, and she was timing it perfectly to cause maximum damage to my deadlines and presentations. Eventually, she broke down and admitted everything. She said she'd been feeling threatened by my work quality and was worried that I was going to get promoted ahead of her. So she decided to level the playing field by making sure my projects would fail while helping herself look better in comparison. The most twisted part was that she'd been positioning herself as my helpful colleague and supportive friend, while simultaneously destroying my career behind the scenes. All those late nights she spent helping me recreate my work. She was the reason I needed to recreate it in the first place. She'd been playing this elaborate long game where she would sabotage my projects, then swoop in to help me deal with the crisis she'd created. It made her look like a team player and a problem solver, while making me look incompetent and unreliable. The company fired her immediately, and I got the promotion she'd stolen through sabotage. But the whole experience left me feeling paranoid and distrustful of my co-workers. How do you ever really know if someone is genuinely trying to help you, or if they're secretly working against you? The psychological impact of discovering that level of betrayal is honestly devastating. Like, Michelle wasn't just competing for a promotion, she was systematically destroying someone's confidence and career while pretending to be their friend. That's genuinely sociopathic behavior. What really gets me is how she positioned herself as the helpful colleague who would stay late to help fix problems that she created in the first place. That's such a calculated manipulation tactic. She was literally creating chaos just so she could be the hero who swooped in to save the day. And the fact that this went on for over a year shows incredible patience and planning. This wasn't some impulsive decision made in the heat of competition. This was a sustained campaign of professional sabotage that required technical knowledge and careful timing. I can't imagine how violated this person must have felt, realizing that someone they trusted had been systematically undermining them for months. It would make you question every interaction you'd ever had with that person and wonder what else they might have been lying about. All right, let's keep building here while we move into our next story. This one's about family dynamics, and honestly, sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally can be the ones who hurt you the most. This story is called "My Sister Has Been Lying to My Parents About Me for Years to Make Herself Look Better." I'm 26 years old, and I've always had a complicated relationship with my younger sister Emma. She's 23, and has always been what you'd call the golden child in our family. She's charming, outgoing, and has this ability to make everyone love her instantly. Meanwhile, I've always been more introverted and focused on my career. For years, I've felt like my parents favoured Emma, but I chalked it up to birth order dynamics and different personality types. I figured they just related to her better, because she's more social and expressive. I never thought there was any deliberate manipulation happening. But last month, I discovered that Emma has been systematically lying to our parents about me for at least 5 years. She's been creating this false narrative about my life that makes me look irresponsible and selfish, while positioning herself as the perfect daughter who's always trying to help her troubled older brother. The truth came out during a family dinner when my mum made a comment about how worried she was about my drinking problem. I was completely confused because I barely drink alcohol. Maybe I'll have a beer with dinner once or twice a month, but that's about it. I've never had any issues with alcohol in my life. When I asked what she meant, my mum said that Emma had been telling them for years that I was struggling with alcoholism and that she was constantly having to take care of me when I got too drunk to function. She said Emma had told them about multiple incidents where she'd had to pick me up from bars or help me deal with hangovers. I was absolutely stunned. None of that had ever happened. Emma and I don't even go out together very often, and when we do, we usually just grab dinner or see a movie. I've never been drunk around her, and I've certainly never needed her to take care of me. But as the conversation continued, more lies started coming to light. My parents thought I was in massive credit card debt because Emma had told them I was constantly asking her for money to pay my bills. They thought I was having relationship problems because she'd told them I was always crying to her about my dating life. They even thought I was struggling at work because she'd claimed I was constantly complaining about my job and talking about getting fired. None of this was true. I'm actually doing really well financially, my relationship is solid, and I love my job. But Emma had spent years creating this elaborate fiction about my life that painted me as this mess of a person who was constantly leaning on her for support. The worst part was realizing how this had affected my relationship with my parents. They'd been treating me with this mixture of pity and disappointment for years, and I never understood why. Now I knew it was because they thought I was this irresponsible person who was taking advantage of my younger sister's kindness. When I confronted Emma about the lies, she initially tried to deny everything. But when I pointed out specific things she'd told our parents that were completely fabricated, she broke down and admitted that she'd been making things up. Her explanation was that she felt like she was living in my shadow and needed to do something to make herself look better in comparison. She said I'd always been the responsible older child, and she felt pressure to compete with my achievements. So she decided to tear down my reputation while building up her own. She'd been telling our parents stories about how she was constantly helping me through various crises, which made her look like this compassionate and reliable person, while making me look like a burden. It was this twisted way of elevating herself by dragging me down. What really hurt was discovering that some of my favourite family memories were tainted by her lies. Times when I thought we were having genuine bonding moments, document everything going forward. I started keeping detailed records of my ideas, saving timestamps on emails, and even recording our team meetings when legally allowed. I wanted to build a case that would prove David's pattern of taking credit for other people's work. The opportunity to expose him came 3 months ago when our company announced a competition for employees to submit innovative project proposals. The winning idea would receive a $10,000 implementation budget, and the creator would get to lead the project development. I spent weeks developing a proposal for a new customer analytics tool that would integrate with our existing software. It was complex, innovative, and something that could really set our company apart from competitors. I was really excited about the potential impact this could have on both our business and my career. I made the mistake of sharing my proposal with David before submitting it, thinking he might have useful feedback or suggestions. He seemed enthusiastic about the idea and offered to help me refine the presentation. I should have known better by then, but I still trusted that he wouldn't steal something this significant. 2 days before the submission deadline, I discovered that David had submitted his own proposal that was almost identical to mine. He'd taken my core concept, my research, my technical specifications, and even some of my exact wording, then submitted it under his own name. I was absolutely furious, but I also knew this was my chance to finally expose what he'd been doing. I had timestamps on all my documents, email records of my research, and even recordings of conversations where I'd discussed my ideas with him. I had everything I needed to prove that he'd stolen my work. Instead of confronting David directly, I decided to let the situation play out. I submitted my original proposal as planned, knowing that the review committee would see 2 nearly identical submissions and would have to investigate. Sure enough, when the review committee saw both proposals, they immediately noticed the similarities and launched an investigation. They interviewed both of us separately and asked for documentation of our development process. I was able to provide detailed records showing months of research and development, including early drafts with timestamps that predated David's submission by weeks. David, on the other hand, couldn't provide any evidence of his development process because he hadn't actually done any of the work. The investigation expanded beyond just this one incident when I provided evidence of David's pattern of taking credit for other people's ideas over the past 2 years. The review committee was shocked by the scope of his misconduct and the systematic way he'd been stealing from his team members. David was fired within a week, and I was awarded the project grant along with his former position as team lead. But more importantly, the company implemented new policies to prevent this kind of intellectual theft from happening again. The whole experience taught me that sometimes you have to be strategic about how you handle workplace bullies and thieves. Direct confrontation might not always be the best approach, especially when you're dealing with someone in a position of power. But if you document everything and wait for the right opportunity, the truth will eventually come out. And you know what? Building this little Minecraft house while telling these stories has been surprisingly therapeutic. There's something about creating something peaceful and orderly while processing all this chaos that people put each other through. These stories remind us that, unfortunately, some people are willing to lie, steal, and manipulate to get what they want, even when it means destroying relationships and betraying trust. But they also show us that the truth has a way of coming out eventually, and that standing up for yourself and others is always worth it, even when it's difficult. Thanks for joining me for another session of Reddit Stories and Minecraft. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments which one surprised you the most. I've got plenty more where these came from. And honestly, the internet never seems to run out of wild human drama to explore. Until next time, keep building, keep listening, and remember that sometimes the most therapeutic thing you can do is just acknowledge that other people's problems make your own life seem pretty manageable by comparison, presenting them as his own in meetings with upper management. At first, I thought maybe it was just miscommunication, or that he was genuinely forgetting where ideas originated. But over time, it became clear that this was a deliberate pattern. The way it works is that we'll have team meetings where people brainstorm solutions to problems or suggest new features for our software. David will listen to everyone's input, ask follow-up questions, and seem genuinely interested in what people have to say. Then a few days later, he'll present those same ideas to his supervisors as if they came from his own brilliant mind. This has been particularly frustrating for me because I tend to come up with a lot of innovative solutions to technical problems. I'll spend hours researching and developing ideas, then share them with the team, thinking we're all working together toward common goals. But then David will take my concepts and get all the recognition while I'm left feeling invisible. The most recent example happened about 6 months ago when our company was trying to solve a major performance issue with our main application. I spent weeks analyzing the code and researching different optimization techniques. I finally came up with a solution that involved restructuring how we handle database queries, which would significantly improve load times. I presented my findings to David and the rest of our team during our weekly meeting. Everyone seemed impressed, and David asked me a lot of detailed questions about the implementation. I was excited because I thought this could be a real career-defining moment for me. 2 days later, I found out that David had scheduled a presentation with the VP of Engineering to discuss his innovative solution to our performance problems. When I asked him about it, he said he wanted to make sure the technical details were communicated properly to upper management, so he was going to handle the presentation himself. I watched from the back of the conference room as David explained my solution to a room full of executives, using my research and my code examples, but never once mentioning that the idea came from me. He talked about the weeks of analysis he'd done and how proud he was of this breakthrough. The VP was so impressed that he praised David's technical expertise and innovative thinking. After that meeting, David got a significant bonus and was fast-tracked for a promotion. Meanwhile, I was still sitting at the same desk, working on the same projects, with no recognition for what I'd actually accomplished. I decided I needed to